This is the last thylacine, sometimes called the Tasmanian wolf or Tasmanian tiger. He died in Beaumaris Zoo, Hobart, Tasmania, on the evening of Monday, September 7th, 1936, 3 months after his species was granted full protection. It almost brings me to tears when I watch this video, but today I don't want to talk about how he and his kind died. I want to talk about how they lived. What did they hunt? Which living carnivores are they most similar to? Historically, they've been compared to wolves, but is this a sound comparison? And were they the world's last marsupial superpredators? If you'd like to find out the answers to these questions, keep watching. Hi, I'm Professor Steve Wroe. I'm a real paleontologist, and you're watching Real Paleontology. And today, we're talking thylacines. And I point out here that I have a special interest in this animal. I've studied and published on the thylacine and its close relatives since I started my PhD over 30 years ago. We've learned a lot over this time, and very recently, new film and photography have come to light. I'll be showing this throughout this episode. Now, before I talk about how the thylacine lived, just a quick bit of backstory. The thylacine, Thylacinus cynocephalus, was the last surviving member of the family Thylacinidae. Before the 1990s, there were only 2 species known, but over the last few decades, it has become increasingly clear that this was once a very diverse group. There are now at least 14 different species of Thylacinid recognized, depending on how we classify them. 3 new fossil species were described here by Timothy Churchill and others just last year. The thylacine's closest living relatives are the dasyurids, a family of carnivorous and insectivorous marsupials that includes the Tasmanian devil and the quolls, sometimes called native cats. Anyway, by the time Europeans arrived here, thylacines were the last remaining member of the clan. So we didn't just lose a species when we kicked it into oblivion. In effect, we lost an entire family. Now, until around 3,500 years ago or so, the Tasmanian tiger was not just a Tasmanian species. Its remains have been found from the island of New Guinea in the north right across to Western Australia. So this was once a very successful species until humans. Why it disappeared from the mainland is a debated issue. Was it hunting by the first Australians? Certainly, it had coexisted with the indigenous people of this land for 50 or 60,000 years. They almost certainly did hunt it, as depicted in this cave art from northern Australia, which shows a thylacine struck by a 3-pronged spear. Or was it the dingo, Australia's native dog, which was introduced by Indonesian seafarers 3 or 4,000 years ago? Either way, humans were the root cause. The dingo didn't swim here. And of course, climate change may well have played a role too. Interestingly, there is now a concerted effort to bring the thylacine back using genetic engineering. The extinction of the thylacine and the question as to whether or not we should bring it back are hotly debated issues, and I will address these in another episode. Here, we're going to focus, like I said, on how it lived. What was its ecological role? Was it more like a cat, more like a wolf, or more like something else entirely? And first up, we have an important question. How big was it? Because size really matters. Pretty recently, the general consensus was that the thylacine was around the size of a large dog, with a maximum of up to around 35 kilos or 77 pounds in weight, and an average of nearly 30 kilograms or 65 pounds. However, 2 quite recent papers have brought this into question. In 2012, Mike Lechnick and friends here compared thylacines and dingoes from Western Australia and concluded that on average, the thylacines were smaller, and even big dingoes don't exceed 24 kilos or so in weight. And then in 2020, Douglas Ravinsky and colleagues really downsized the thylacine to an average of well below 20 kilograms or 44 pounds based on Tasmanian material. Obviously, if correct, This has significant implications regarding its place in Australia's prehistoric ecology. And I'm inclined to think that these recent estimates are closer to the money than previous attempts. That said, I would add caveats. These estimates are based on material from very restricted geographic ranges, the island of Tasmania and the southwest corner of the mainland. It's certainly possible, if not likely, that at times some populations in other parts of Australia and New Guinea were larger. Moreover, the Thylacine was in existence for at least 1.8 million years, and average sizes are likely to have fluctuated both up and down over this period. Okay, what do detailed studies of thylacine biomechanics and anatomy tell us? Before we get into this, one thing that needs to be made clear is that all researchers do agree on at least one thing. The thylacine was a true hypercarnivore. The great bulk of its diet was meat. Even a cursory examination of its teeth makes this abundantly clear. Its cheek teeth comprise series of very well developed vertical shearing blades with a very limited capacity for crushing either plant material or bone. So with that out of the way, one of the first attempts to apply biomechanics to this question was provided by Jones and Stoddart here in 1998. They looked at canine tooth strength and the ratios of different limb bones relative to those of a pretty wide range of other marsupial and placental carnivores. They concluded that the thylacine was a pounce pursuit predator of relatively open habitats and that it concentrated on prey less than 5 kilograms or so in weight. These authors also determined that the thylacine was not the ecological equivalent of a wolf, as had often been suggested previously, but more like a small prey specialist such as the coyote. Some years later, in 2007, myself and some colleagues generated 3D computer models of a dingo and thylacine skull. We ran these through a bunch of simulations, and long story short, came to a conclusion broadly consistent with the findings of Jones and Stoddart. The skull of the dingo was better adapted to take the kind of random forces that might be expected in encounters with large, wildly struggling prey than was the thylacine. We got further confirmation of this in a 2011 paper led by my then PhD student, Marie Attard. I would add one caveat here too, though. These computer simulations suggested that the thylacine was capable of generating a much higher bite force than a dog or wolf of the same size. More than 50% higher, in fact. And that's a lot. In this 2005 paper, our prediction of 808 newtons of bite force at the canine teeth for the thylacine was not far off that of a 50 kilo direwolf. This is even more remarkable when we consider that, in the light of new evidence, it seems unlikely that this thylacine could have weighed much more than 30 kilograms. And we also know from this and other studies that bite force correlates quite strongly with prey size. The bigger the bite, the bigger the prey. The most recent study looking at the thylacine skull in the context of its prey preferences is this one by Douglas Ravinsky and others in 2021. These guys were looking at skull shape and they made broad comparisons including 57 species of marsupial and placental carnivores. These authors also concluded that the thylacine must have routinely preyed on smaller animals, probably 45% of their own body weight or less. This certainly suggests that their prey range was considerably broader than the 1 to 5 kilos suggested by Jones and Stoddart, but still a small to medium-sized prey specialist, not in the same league as big game hunting wolves or big cats. In terms of shape, they found that the thylacine was closest to African jackals and South American foxes. There's another relevant analysis that we should consider here. This one by Borja Figueiredo and Christine Janus, 2011. These guys looked at the anatomy of the thylacine's elbow joint. They found that its forelimb was quite flexible, more like that of a cat's than a dog or wolf's. This suggests that it was an ambush predator, not a pounce or pursuit predator that ran down its prey over long distances. They also looked at its teeth and reconfirmed that it was a hypercarnivore. So there you have it. We could quibble over the details, but pretty much everyone who has looked into the predatory behaviour of the thylacine over the last quarter century or so has concluded that it was a small to medium-sized prey specialist and an ambush, but certainly not a specialised pursuit carnivore. And I would include myself among these researchers. But although I agree that the thylacine likely targeted prey smaller than itself, there remains one line of evidence that still bugs me. What the hell was it doing with that humongous great bite? At this point, I have no answer. But one thing's for sure, I would not want to be bitten by a thylacine. Now, there are two more questions I'd like to delve into, but before I do, if you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. Only takes a couple of seconds, costs you nothing, but it means a lot to me. Anyway, back in 1999, Carbone and friends published this now widely cited paper, Energetic Constraints on the Diet of Carnivores. Basically, they looked at the energetic costs of hunting and killing prey relative to the energetic benefits of eating it. They found that as predators get larger, the costs of catching and killing prey grows faster than the energetic benefits to be gained. That is, unless the relative size of the prey increases. So, for example, for a lion, it's just not worth the effort to specialise in hunting rabbit-sized animals, although they may take them on occasion. But in general, the energy that it gets from a rabbit doesn't warrant the energy taken to find and catch it. This is why lion-sized carnivores typically prey on animals that are close to their own body size or bigger. On the other hand, small cats can afford to specialise in relatively small mouse-sized prey. Carbone and friends identified an average weight of 21.5 kilograms or 47 pounds as the threshold here. So, any carnivorous species with an average body weight above this figure must theoretically prey on animals that are close to its own size or bigger, at least most of the time. Now, hopefully, you can see where I'm going here. Taken at face value, this would mean that if earlier estimates of the thylacine's body mass at around 30 kilo were right, then it would have to have been a big prey specialist. Given that everyone now agrees that thylacines concentrated on small to medium-sized prey, this would be a problem. But obviously, this problem goes away if we accept that thylacines weighed less than 21.5 kilos on average, as suggested earlier by Ravinsky and friends in 2021. Solved, you say? Well, not quite, in my opinion. You see, the Tasmanian tiger was not the biggest member of the thylacine clan. If we go back a little further, there were at least two species that were significantly larger. Thylacinus potens and Thylacinus magiriani. These were 8 to maybe 4 or 5 million years in age. How much bigger were they? Well, it's impossible to be precise here. We don't even have complete skulls, let alone complete skeletons of either. We do have most of the teeth and part of the snout for both. Here they are, compared to the recent thylacine. And unless they had ridiculously big heads, they were clearly much bigger than the Tasmanian tiger. Of the two, Thylacinus magiriani is the largest, and based on tooth measurements, it may have weighed 60 kilos or more. Even if we're out by a factor of 2, this still greatly exceeds the 21.5 kilo limit for a small prey specialist. So, either Carbone and friends' prediction doesn't apply here, or these two giant thylacines were in fact big prey specialists. Anyway, in conclusion, was the Tasmanian tiger the world's last marsupial superpredator? Well, if I'm going to adhere to my own rulebook here, as set out in this earlier episode, then the thylacine was indeed a superpredator, at least for most of the last 40,000 years or so of its existence. That is, it was a predator with no natural predators of its own, other than humans. Of course, if we go back further than 40,000 years or so, there were bigger predators in Ice Age Australia, such as the awesome marsupial lion and gigantic monitor lizard. I've covered both in previous episodes. But was it the last marsupial superpredator? Well, again, if I follow my own rulebook, it was not. Still today, there is a marsupial carnivore that has no real natural predators of its own, the Tasmanian devil. And this feisty little fella is worth an episode of its own. Thanks for watching. Next week, I reckon we'll look at the causes of the Thylacine's extinction, and indeed, whether it really is extinct. We'll also look at the latest developments regarding its resurrection on the back of advances in gene technology, and its proposed reintroduction to the wild. Just how practical might this be, and should we do it just because we can?